Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the Union County Board of Commissioners Monday, May 10th, 2021 Budget Workshop. Today we will have a full agenda with a primary focus on capital budget and funding. I'll recognize the County Manager and Michelle Lancaster, Deputy County Manager, and we'll get started. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the board and staff that we have here this afternoon. We have several guests with us. Dr. Maria Farr from South Piedmont Community College, and we have Miss Kathy Heintel from the Union County Board of Education. We appreciate you being here with us this afternoon. As the chairman said, there's quite a bit to share with the board this afternoon, mainly regarding capital items. You'll be receiving reports regarding the ad hoc committee findings. You'll be receiving reports related to county capital projects. And just as important, you'll be receiving information on potential funding plans for large capital projects. We do have our financial representatives here this afternoon that will be speaking to the board on that topic. And lastly, we will have an item for your action at the end of the meeting regarding one-time funding and the allocation of the sales tax revenue that exceeds what we had projected earlier in the year. So with that, I will turn it over to Deputy County Manager Michelle Lancaster, who will begin leading us through this capital discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to jump right in. This is theory. There we go. All right, I'm going to start today with the Education Capital Ad Hoc Committee report, and then we'll follow that with Beverly is going to do a presentation on GFOA capital planning best practices and guidelines. You're going to hear from Chris Boyd and Patrick Nyland on some general county capital items that our capital plan is looking at. And then you'll hear from Jared White on our capital funding debt model, and then, as Mark said, the one-time funding items that we have action requested for today. So the first four things that we're going to go through, we're not asking you to take any action today, but you are going to have a lot of information that you're going to receive, and so we really would like to make sure that we're getting as much feedback, any questions that you have, if we can't answer those today, that we could get back to you, because you will see these items come back for recommendation in the future. So I'm going to start with the Education Capital Plan. I think you all recall that this is a committee that was recommended after a budget request was made, or a bond request was made last year as we were preparing our budget. This ad hoc committee was made up of members from UCPS, SPCC, and the County Board of County Commissioners. So we had Chairman Helms and former Commissioner Frank Akmus who participated, Chairman Melissa Merrill and Vice Chairman Kathy Heintel from the UCPS Board of Education, Mike Lutz and Bill Norwood from the SPCC Board of Directors who participated. We've spent quite a bit of staff time on working through this committee and capital process. So we had a total of 12 county and other staff meetings, 3 committee meetings of the group, and then in your package of the information that you received today for this meeting, you have the report that was prepared by our facilitator, Ed Gagnon, who facilitated this process. And so I want to thank Ed for his work on this process. He really worked closely with staff and with the committee in preparing this work. I also want to thank the staff from UCPS, particularly Mark Strickland and Dave Burnett, who worked very closely with us on preparing these items, and then Maria Farr and Elizabeth Hamrick and Michelle Brock at SPCC, who worked very closely, as well as Beverly Lyles and Jared White, our financial advisor. There are representatives here today from UCPS and SPCC, and after I provide just a high-level overview, I'm going to give them just a couple minutes to speak to the board to give you kind of their perspective on where we've landed with this recommendation. Again, I'm going to say this probably a lot. We're not asking for any action today, but we are making kind of the overall recommendation from the group. One of the things that we will definitely be coming back to this board for is direction regarding future bond questions, if any, timing of bonds, what the size of a bond request would look like, and again, if there are specific projects from SPCC or UCPS that you would like more information on. If we can't answer that today, we want to make sure that we get you that information. The group of the committee really focused on 4 phases. The first phase was creating a collective goal for capital planning. And so the group agreed that they really had, we all had a common goal of meeting community education needs in a sustainable, financially sustainable manner. And that was really, I think, one of the underpinnings of the work that this group did. The second phase was to gain an understanding of the current financial state. And this existed, the way that this presentation went was we provided all of the background and information on the current debt that the county has regarding education funding, and they learned about bond ratings and additional things about what we look at in terms of how we rate to maintain that AAA bond rating, and you'll get to hear some of that later today as well. The third phase was forecasting additional needs and funding strategies. And so the groups, both organizations, SPCC and UCPS, spent a lot of time building out their capital plan. And so I hope that you'll all see what I think is really positive is we have 10-year plans from both of our educational partners that has really been given a great amount of thought. It has some consistency in it. We agreed on what our inflation numbers would look like so that everything is treated the same across both organizations. And then the fourth phase was really putting together the long-term capital plan. And you have a copy of that document. And just to highlight the statement of agreement from the Capital Long-Term Planning Committee, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but you can see the things that they really focused on. Again, focusing on the next 2 years with a standard methodology for costing projects, staging them over time, identifying an approach that would enable the county to maintain our AAA bond rating, and having resources available for other county capital needs as well. And then adding at the end there that they really expect staff to revisit this capital plan on an annual basis and encourage engagement for those bodies as we move forward. The Educational Capital Plan consists of 21 projects from both organizations. That was not by design. It just so happened that there are 21 projects from each group. The UCPS number is a little more than $757 million, and the SPCC number is a little more than $68 million. And so what you will see today and what you see in your package is really a couple things from our financial advisor. What would debt look like over time if we just layered that debt in over those costs in over 10 years? And we also asked Jared to look at a model that would give us a sustainable approach to a level debt funding model. And so he's going to share that with you as well. And so that really covers this at a very high level. Again, we're going to come back with recommendations. I cannot recommend a model that I could get today under a revenue neutral tax rate. I wish I could. I cannot do that. So we will be making some recommendations on what a debt funding model can look like going forward, so you will see that at a future meeting. And so now I'll recognize the folks from UCPS and SPCC to come up and say a few words. Maria?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us be a part of this plan. We know that going forward, this is something that is best for Union County. And as what I wanted to talk a little bit about is, as you look at all of the 21 projects that South Piedmont has on our very long spreadsheet, I wanted to highlight a couple of things. About 86% of those projects relate to academic programming, and that includes new construction, renovation, or acquisition of critical technology. And when you consider that 1 out of 59 jobs in our area are impacted by South Piedmont Community College, including our county's first responders and medical personnel who are critical to the community's quality of life, we provide the essential training and the certification for our law enforcement and our public health. All of these types of programs we know that they are essential programs, and they require continual upgrades and specialized facilities and equipment. So nearly half of the projects in that category for academic programming relate to our protective services, and including the aseptic training facility, which I might also add is in partnership with some of our pharmaceutical manufacturing as well as our healthcare agencies who are looking to us to provide that type of training. With our public safety training center, that is also something that supports multiple agencies. This would include fire, law enforcement, as well as emergency medical services. And this is something that would support all of those agencies within Union County. In addition, we have been looking at renovations and new constructions related to the 2016 bond, but unfortunately those costs had been calculated in 2009 and did not consider the escalation that it would be required to meet 2021 prices. And so we also hope that you recognize that there are some requests to help us complete just the basic renovations we need for what we call Building A, as well as in Western Union County, we are building a Center for Entrepreneurship. And that is something that is in partnership with Wingate University, as well as our community and business, so that we can provide the business leadership, management, and entrepreneurship that we need so that we can continue to move our economy forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Kathy Heintel from the Union County Public Schools Board of Education. Some of the items that you see on our education capital plan are some that we asked for in last year's budget. Our education capital plan focuses on our older schools, and some of those schools need to be updated or rebuilt or whatever. The first one is Forest Hills High School, and then East Union Middle School is probably worse from its age. It's like 1924, some of the buildings. Anytime anybody wants to go see them, I would be happy to show them. We would build a new Forest Hills High School, and then we would renovate a little bit the old high school, and then East Union would move into that. A new East Elementary School, some design for Parkwood High School. Piedmont would be later on, and the rest of Sun Valley that didn't get touched in this last project. Also on here is a CTE school that we would take the old Venus Street, the transportation facility on Venus Street, and turn it into a CTE facility for our students, so that would be new. New to the school. We would put automotive and collision in that facility as well. I wasn't supposed to speak tonight, so I'm doing my best. And then we're also talking about some smaller projects, like Weddington High School doesn't have a connecting corridor like the other high schools of the same facility. Benton Heights needs some work. Most of our stuff has to do with aging facilities and on the east side and getting some equity there. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you to both Maria and Kathy for their work on this. So For this item, are there any questions that you have that you would like for us to try to address today? Or we can follow up offline? Follow up offline? Got it. The additional items that we're going to go through today are listed here, and Mark and I both referenced them. So we will now move into the GFOA Best Practices and Guidelines presentation, and Beverly Lyles is going to do that presentation.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about the capital planning, GFOA, best practices and guidelines. GFOA is the Government Finance Officers National Association. So they provide us as finance directors with governmental industry standards for best practices. We're just going to hit the major highlights today for capital planning. There's a lot of detail that would actually go into each one of these steps, but we could spend all day talking about each one of those items. So this illustration here illustrates the top 5 items that we think about when we go through our capital planning cycle. The first is that you should have an adopted capital policy, and we have had one of those in place for many years. In addition to that, we talk about master planning. Sometimes when we think about master planning, we think about our water and sewer master plan that's put into place from Black and Veatch. We haven't spent a lot of time in the past putting together master plans for our county facility needs, but we are going to do that in the future, and Chris Boyd will talk about that today. Also, when we think about master planning, I want you to think about comprehensive plans as well. We take those master plans and we put them into our multi-year capital planning funding model, and we'll get into more detail about that as well. After your infrastructure is in place, we want to think about asset management and how do we manage those assets that we have to keep them working properly. And also, how do we communicate that to our citizens and out to our departments and also back to you as a board. So GFOA recommends that every government adopt a capital planning policy. And for each different government, that can be unique based on your citizens that you serve or your environment that you're in at the time. So these are just a few highlights from our CIP policy. The actual entire policy can be found on our website. It's also published annually in our adopted budget document that's on the Budget Management's website as well. In our CIP policy, we said we would place anything in our CIP plan that costs at least $100,000, has a useful life of at least 10 years, with the exception of information technology assets. And if they have a useful life of at least 5 years, we would include those in that. We also said we would adopt our CIP annually as part of the budget process, so we revisit that every year. Our CIP plan will be for a 6-year period. That gives us the opportunity to look forward, as we have with our ad hoc committee for education, to know what our upcoming funding plan needs to be and how can we accommodate that and how can it be affordable. Some other highlights are we, of course, do everything in accordance with North Carolina General Statutes 159, as well as we consider any new debt that you agree to add on that it would be funded through a property tax rate increase. The second cycle is master planning and comprehensive plans. I want you to think about, as a board, when you're actually looking at master plans and you're looking at your comprehensive plan, I want you to think about, is this really aligning with your vision as a board and how you see us as an organization moving forward? Some of the questions I would like you to consider is, does the master plan align with your vision and our community needs to provide the infrastructure we need going forward for many years to come? The capital investment decisions that are made that align with our long-term master plan and comprehensive plan is, how do we actually plan to link that into our funding model for our multi-year funds? And when you are actually reviewing the master plans at that time, I think it's easy as a board to say, we really like this plan, we want to adopt it moving forward. But in the past, at that time, we've never really asked you to think about the affordability. And if that's something you're really willing to pay for, you know, maybe 10 years down the road or even 5 years down the road. And of course, during that time when we're developing master plans and comprehensive plans, is what is the affordability? What are all the other financial factors that need to be considered? When we're adding those in our plans, are we going to remain physically sustainable? And of course, that's our overall goal as an organization, is to remain sustainable, but also provide infrastructure that we need. I remember when I first came to work at the county, we had a committee called Vision 2020, and I thought, why in the world are we worrying about something 20 years down the road? Well, here we are, and now you're worrying about your 2050 plan, and seeing some of those things come to fruition, you know, has presented challenges as a county, but also what's being included in your 2050 plan also will provide opportunities for our infrastructure going forward. So this is where we're at in our capital planning cycle now, as we're developing our multi-year capital plan. GFOA, of course, says this needs to be a comprehensive plan. It needs to be physically sustainable. So we have identified our needs that's being presented to you today for education. Chris is going to talk to you about our capital needs for county facility infrastructure, and Patrick will talk to you about some public safety capital needs. We've determined what the financial impact would be for all of those that Jared will be presenting to you in a financial model. But one of the things we would ask you to consider is, what is your priority as a board for these capital requests going forward? We take those priorities and we develop that comprehensive financial plan. We have to look at, you know, available revenue sources. We have to have all of our tools in the toolbox. It's not only debt, it's what can we afford to pay with cash? Is there any grants available? Also, what is that operating impact going to be? We're seeing that come into fruition now with some of our bond projects that were funded with the 2016 bonds. They're coming online, and now we have to figure out a way, how do we pay for that increased operating impact that you'll be seeing in your upcoming FY22 recommended budget. And also, part of the capital planning cycle is you have to have a capital asset management procedure in place. Chris Boyd, since he's been here, he's done an excellent job actually doing an asset inventory to determine, you know, what is the condition of all of our assets. So GFOA recommends that there's a complete asset inventory and periodic measurement of asset conditions, and that we establish conditional and performance standards for those. Evaluate, you know, are those assets still meeting their appropriate need to deliver services out to our citizens? And I won't read all of these, but one thing that I think is important is that, you know, we're monitoring these infrastructure needs, and, you know, some of the things we need to take in consideration is our replacement cycles. Are they realistic, or do they need to be revamped? And then GFOA, of course, recommends that all of that information is provided to you as a board at least every 3 years. What Chris is going to present to you today provides to you the infrastructure needs that he has assessed, and he has a priority scale that he puts into that plan, and he says, this is how I identify our critical infrastructure needs. So kudos to Chris Boyd. This is the first time in my history here that we've had someone actually do that work and lay it out in a priority-based method. And then the last phase is your communication strategy. How do we develop a plan for public participation? I think we've seen this greatly with developing the comprehensive plan. There's been a lot of work that's gone into that. And how capital programs can actually gain support from community stakeholders. I think that's very important for the amount of money we actually are investing in our capital infrastructure needs. In addition to communication throughout the phases of a project, we need to maintain communication through the end of those projects. And how do we monitor progress and reporting of that? I think a great example of what the county has done with the Yadkin River program is we have a dedicated website, and we've informed our citizens along the way of progress and where we're at and how we're moving forward. I think we can do that also with some of our other major capital projects going forward. We have a great communications team in place now with Catherine and her group to help us utilize some of their skill sets to do that. And this is the resources for GFOA best practices. This will give you a much deeper dive if you want to dive into some of these topics even deeper. And I'll be glad to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners and County Manager Watson. I appreciate the opportunity to share some information about the development of our facilities capital plan, especially for our fiscal year 2022 through 27. Beverly mentioned having a multi-year plan, and this aligns with the 6-year requirement that her group maintains. The agenda for me today is going to talk a little bit about our 21 program, just some highlights from our 21 program, talk about our planning process, dive a little deeper into our master plan process that we plan to undertake here in the next couple of months, talk a little bit about an overview of our 2022 to 27 CIP, dive a little deeper into our major capital and CRI details within that plan, and then finally talk a little bit about the fiscal year 2022 CIP project list that is going to be really our hard recommendation for, in this year's budget. So those are the things I want to talk about. To start out, I won't hit all these projects, but, it's been a tough year, for the construction industry. But I think we've managed some of those hurdles pretty well. We've had issues with supply chain issues. We've had regulatory review issues. We've had pricing issues. So we faced those head-on, developed some solutions to them, and have made some progress on a lot of projects. Most of the projects that we finished this past year are relatively small projects. But I think you're aware, and when we get to it, I'll talk about some of the big ones that are in construction, and moving things from design into construction are a big deal. Moving them from even design to bidding phase is a big deal. So these are a list of some of the projects that we completed. In particular, you see a lot about LED lighting, and that's actually one line in our operating capital program or bucket, and it's called energy savings. And so those are just kind of easy projects that we knock off with that one line. We've got several in design at different and varying stages of design. We've got a human resource training room and a jail generator all at water source, which I think everyone's aware that we need to get that project done as soon as possible. Anyway, those are in late stages of design. We've got some other projects. I even list the master plan, which we'll get into detail a little bit later. We've got several in bidding phase. Our Southwest Union Library is moved from design into the bidding phase. Our Progress Building Phase 1 renovations, basically to get economic development relocated at that facility, are in the bidding phase, and a small project out of the Ag Center. Of course, the big projects that have moved from design into construction, the Sheriff's Office, Emergency Services, Board of Elections, and Historic Courthouse are some of our bigger projects. I wish I could move the Special Events Center over to completed, but it'll be about 2 more weeks, I think, until we can officially call that completed. So just to kind of refresh, some of our strategy and our process related to capital. About our 4 buckets that we try to push our projects into: our major capital, our critical infrastructure, our facility repair renovation, and operating capital buckets. One of our goals is to, especially with the FRR and the OC, is to develop a level funding approach year to year. A little more difficult on the major capital side because projects, are a lot of different scopes and scales. Just to refresh, again, major capital projects that are over $300,000, critical infrastructure don't really have a dollar limit. Those are really for critical facilities and or critical assets that are essential for maintaining and operating facilities. Our facility repair and renovation are projects between 100 and 300, and then our operating capital are smaller projects that are less than $100,000. So Beverly mentioned our project priority ranking system. I do want to point out that we do try to rank and prioritize based on the system. There are some mitigating factors, that do adjust priorities within our system. most likely related to sequencing issues with projects, to having to do something before the other. So we try our best to use this ranking system to inform. It also helps us with making decisions on projects that need to move from year to year. It I think may help you when you're talking about approving projects in this fiscal year 22. If there's any that need to push, maybe you look at the ranking and say, okay, well, this one maybe goes to the next year. A little detail on that, it all kind of ends with this priority quotient, which actually ends up being its priority score in our database. What does that equal? Well, that's basically a sum of all these UC concerns addressed divided by the project type importance, which is a scale 1 to 10, plus project type priority weighted at 50% of the project type importance. And so project type importance, we've got basically 10 types of projects, each with a varying degree of importance. And you can see in this column, we've got it basically listed 1 through 10. So the most important type of projects in our plan are safety. And it goes on down the list: security, infrastructure, space needs, and so on. Because it's in the divisor, if it's a lower number, then the score remains higher. If it's 9 in the divisor, of course, the project score goes down. Then next is the project type priority. So once you put all your projects and all your needs together and assign them a project type, then within that project type, group of project type, then there is an assignment of priority internally. So there's a little bit of subjectivity to assigning the project type priority. And then the UC concerns addressed. So each project gets scored basically for what they accomplish. And so they can accomplish life safety issues, security. If they have a direct community impact, they'll get points. If it directly impacts the facility's ability to maintain business continuity and down the line. So let's look at an example. So we picked the UC jail block renovations. You can see that it's scored 90 in security, 70 in business continuity, 60 in regulatory, and 40 in life cycle replacement. It happens to be a number 2 in a project type importance and is number 3 overall priority. So what does that equate to? That's a 74.3 overall score based on this formula. And again, as I said, so it does inform our plan, but there are some mitigating factors that move projects around depending on whether it's schedule issues or a reassessment of the condition of an asset. Next, I want to talk a little bit about how we identify our projects. So first and foremost, we do internal assessments annually. We meet with all the division directors, talk about their needs. They share their needs with us. We document those. We also take a look at work order history. So Beverly talked about our inventory of assets. So all our work orders, or we try to get all our work orders tied to an asset. And so we can go back and take a look at any outliers. Does anything stand out? And we identify that potentially as a project. We also just completed a facility condition assessment in October. The program that holds all that information is called VFA. We imported some of that project information into this year's CIP, but not all of it. So one of the things that I'll talk about when we get to it is we're going to modify some of the numbers, or some of the numbers will be adjusted next year as we get better at importing some of that facility condition assessment data. Also, we use any master plans that are current and valid. Their master plan from 10 years ago doesn't have too much validity, in trying to develop a plan in this current cycle. But we do have a few, or one that was completed recently, and that was in a design and sheriff's office. We did a master plan for that site that looked at the jail and what the needs of the jail were. And so that master plan has informed some of the, a couple of projects in the CIP that you'll see a little bit later on. We do have a master plan in progress for Jesse Helms Park. That will be used as we're moving forward to help inform and validate some of the projects that we've got listed in the CIP. We also, and more importantly, have just engaged a designer to start the process to do a master plan for the general government facilities for Union County. And I wanted to go into detail about that a little bit. So what are the goals of this master plan? Because it, to me, is one of the key pieces of this, and you can tell from Beverly's presentation that it is a best practice in government agencies to develop master plans and use those to inform our CIPs. So what are the goals? One of the key ones is to engage this board in the process. So we want to make sure you're engaged in order to set some clear priorities for projects and determine whether we're moving in the right direction or we're way off base or what we're doing. One of the things I want to point out too is that you'll see a lot of big projects in our CIP. And I want to point out that they are really placeholders until we can get to finishing up this master plan process. And I'll talk a little bit about that too. Was there a question? No?
I have a question.
Okay, yes, sir.
The Judicial Center, 16.8 million. First time I've seen that. I got a lot of questions.
Yeah, I imagine you have a lot of questions about a lot of the projects. So we'll get to those, and if you don't mind, we'll dive into details on that a little bit later.
Okay.
And so the master planning process is going to help us confirm or adjust or remove projects as we're moving through based on input from the board and other pieces of the puzzle. It also will help us develop an informed project sequencing plan as well. So what's that master plan schedule look like? Preliminarily, we're going to kick that off in June. We're working through some scope requirements and contracts right now. Department interviews, staff and forecast, June and July. We'll have some presentation of some options for the master plan, which basically is our first time, I think, to engage the board in the process. And so that will allow the board to set some priorities, determine, what options make the most sense. From that, we'll move into cost estimating and into the final master plan development. And at that time, we'll engage you again to make sure and validate that where we're headed is what we agreed to and still is something that the board can support. That'll be sometime in November, and then presentation of final report to the manager and the board sometime in December. So, as we were putting together the CIP for 22-27, there were some key assumptions that were made. One is continued growth. With that continued growth, certainly means some growth in the services that the county provides. We've heard that we need to start thinking about a new courtroom for the Judicial Center. Our current jail's at capacity, and the old jail is in need of significant repairs. We've got some current space constraints at the Government Center, and I'm going to say significant space constraints at the Government Center. There's an anticipation that there's going to be a high use of the Event Center and the Southwest Library once they're completed. Our radio installation shop's currently in a temporary location, and so we're going to have to determine a permanent home for them. Some existing facilities may not be fully utilized. For instance, the historic courthouse, most of it's empty right now. And how can we best utilize that space? The old surplus building will be empty in probably 2-3 months. So how can we utilize that space? Another one to think about, farmers market. How can we utilize and leverage that space and facility to its highest and best use? And then we also have right now significant lease costs for Department of Juvenile Justice and our adult probation to the tune of about $200,000 a year. So how can we leverage that into potentially looking at it as revenue towards, a capital improvement project? Okay, so the overview. So the first look, one of the things I want to focus on in this slide is the second or third and fourth column, FRR and OC. Back to our point of trying to maintain that kind of consistent level of funding in those two buckets. We've done that. I do want to inform you that as we get better at including all our facility condition assessment data into this process, that those numbers are going to fluctuate a little bit, but won't change significantly. The major capital, the MC column, is the big one, right? It's a lot of projects, and we'll get into the specifics of that in just a minute. So, talking about the major capital projects that are included in this CIP, proposed CIP, I've highlighted a few of those that I know are going to stick out, right, and you probably have questions about. And so the first one is in 2023, new government center, driven largely from the need for new courtroom space. So there's not enough space between the existing judicial center and this building to construct an adequately sized courtroom. So one of the thoughts is to leverage this existing space, the government center, more as an extended judicial center. And because this used to be, right, a courtroom. And so leveraging this space to accomplish that seems like one of the options that we can look at. That drives needing a new government center to help manage that issue. I talked about DJJ and adult probation. They used to be located services in this facility and were pushed out, kind of coming full circle. Maybe they come back, and if new government center, then we can put people back into this facility. Some of the other, in 2024, you'll see the first jail expansion project at $65 million. And then you'll also see the second jail expansion over in 2027 at $39 million. The first expansion basically gets us 300 beds and the core support facilities related, to jails, medical, kitchen, specialty housing, things like that. So one of the things to consider in these plans too is that a project like the jail shows up in 2024. It takes, especially a jail, 4 years to turn that project around from funding to completion. So you're looking at a fiscal year 2028 before that building opens. And so that's a significant amount of time from now, to realizing a full project and rendering it useful. Other projects in the list, the judicial complex renovation, that actually is renovating this government center. It's just, in this case, renamed judicial complex. And so that's to renovate this facility to support the judicial operations that would be relocated into here.
Let me ask you something.
Yes, go ahead.
Can the historic courthouse not be used for a courtroom?
I would say that it's going to take a lot of alteration to make that a compliant facility for high scale and high use and high traffic. You're going to have elevators, ramps, a lot of different things that are going to impact the historic integrity of that design. So I would say it's an option. And so back to the point of engaging the board in these discussions when we start the master plan, that may be one of the options that we look at. And so,
Commissioner Rape, that building is designated as a museum. That building is designated as a museum.
Yeah, so I think there's some roadblocks, in looking at the historic courthouse as a courtroom.
What about juvenile court? You spoke of juvenile court earlier. Would juvenile court not fit in pretty well over there with the type of cases I guess they would have to do, or keeping some type of separation with the juveniles versus the adult offenders?
There are limitations on usage in a designated museum.
So they can't, well,
Or something we'd need to talk about, but
Yeah.
there are some significant limitations.
yeah, well, we've separated this building from the designation as being a courthouse or a judicial building for concealed carry and otherwise, so there would be some concerns that I would have there, that we would be taking that ability away from our employees and citizens that they now have. So as far as this building going back to a judicial type building, I have some concerns with that.
Okay, yeah, I as I said, I think there are a lot of questions, in development of the plan. And it's important that we engage you, right, and start talking about, what are some options. But in the end, this was an effort to help identify a longer-term funding plan and model for our overall capital program. And so this is our look and assessment internally at what it's going to take to do that.
One thing, Commissioner Rushing, when Chris was talking about juvenile and adult probation, I mean, those were probationary type offices that he's talking about. We currently are required to lease facilities for those state offices to occupy and work out of. It's a pretty significant cost to us each year. He wasn't necessarily speaking of a specific juvenile court.
And, we are, to that point, we are using rooms in the historic courthouse for congressional purposes, so could we not use those rooms for that type of purposes?
I think that's all part of the master planning process, and all of that needs to be evaluated and looked at in terms of what that designation holds and what the
One other concern, just listening to these real quick,
constraints are.
is what have we learned from COVID and our employees working from home and different organizations working from home? I know that a lot of private sector businesses are looking at the lesser need of space due to the fact of people being able to work from other areas instead of working in a central location. Have we learned anything from that in order to prevent having to expand space at least as fast?
Yeah, I think that's a valid, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say, I think we learned a whole lot from COVID in terms of managing the flexible work schedules, working from home, and we've leveraged the technology to do that in many of our areas. I think one of the areas that is on here for or has been identified for potential expansion is the Human Services Building. I'd let Michelle speak to that item, and I think that really works in well with working from home, et cetera, and what the needs are in such a new facility as the Human Services Building. But I think, Michelle, do you have some insights you want to share on that?
I don't know that I have anything different to add, but I think, and Chris is probably getting ready to say this, I think, yes, we've learned a lot in how we can operate. So I think as we go through the master planning process, that we would be bringing that to the conversation about how do we work differently. I mean, one of the things we learned in the Human Services Building, for example, is where we put a large number of people in an open space. When you think about something like COVID, and you'll remember the 6-foot distancing, that created some challenges over there of making sure that we don't have people in the same space all of the time. So again, I think we can inform the master plan, taking all of those things into consideration, that we might not need the same type or the same amount of space that we might would have thought we needed a year ago at this time. So, we'll be going through that and sharing all that information. I think on the schedule, it included division director engagement so that we can really, inform what that master plan would look like long-term. And then the one thing I would add about the judicial piece, the probation for adult and juvenile, we are scripted by statute in terms of how much space they have to have allocated as well. So we have to take that in order to inform where we can put them, because they're pretty specific about what they expect the counties to provide for those staff people.
I would ask that you consider looking at what our corporate partners do, because they went to working from home, and now they're bringing them back, because they're saying for short term, that works, but long term, there's obstacles that are difficult to deal with. So we have to consider that, especially if we're gonna build a building. We don't wanna build it too small, thinking we're gonna let everybody work from home. And then 3 to 5 years down the road, you said this isn't working. So,
Yeah, well, I will just share that one of the specific lines in our scope of work for our designers is to investigate and evaluate new working models, because there are a lot out there right now, actually, that can be leveraged, to fit each situation. I think every department has different requirements and needs, and we'll have our design team make sure as they go through the interviews to understand how we can leverage that, leverage our new work environment, as much as possible. And it could very well mitigate some, expansions and things like that. Or it could, alter scope and scale and magnitude of some of these projects. Mark mentioned the human services. That's another one on the list. And then we do have the library, Southwest Library Phase 2. If everyone remembers, that building was meant to be a regional library, and based on the timing, how long it's been since we got there, the original budget wasn't sufficient. We're building basically a 20,000 square foot facility, and so there isn't a plan to expand that library. I think it's in year 2026 in this overall plan. So the bigger point is that we're going to engage the board and try to determine some of these priorities, do some work to leverage new working space ideas and ideals, and we'll hopefully get to that this summer and early fall. All right, so then, what's the ask this year, which is probably the most important, because really the projects in the out years are right now, in my opinion, placeholders. And back to the point of it does help inform on the financing side, the scale and magnitude of what the overall financing plan needs to be. But in fiscal year 2022, we do have $10 million worth of major capital projects that we're going to request to be funded. The first one's the jail lock project. It basically enhances that budget. That budget is woefully short. And so we're looking to add money to make that a whole project. UC jail block renovations, was the one we actually scored. That's a phased renovation, block by block. It's going to take about 2.5 to 3 years to fully renovate that. An important part of that equation is that we still have to maintain, from a statutory perspective, the conditions within that jail in order to pass our requirements for housing inmates. So we still have to maintain that facility, even if you do approve moving forward with a significant jail expansion in the future. Because, as I said, it's going to be 8 years before it comes online. We've got 8 years we're going to have to maintain that jail. Event Center's support building, basically, if that is a building to house equipment, storage, open arena fill, a lot of different things to help that facility. Store Courthouse Phase 2, that's the second phase in the waterproofing and water infiltration study that was completed some time ago. That's going to move down the building. Right now, we're just focusing on the bell tower or clock tower, and so we'll move down a level. So we'll talk about foundations, or sometimes there's a lack of foundations over in that building, but dealing with waterproofing the next level down on that project. Jesse Helms Park amenities, so we're talking about some restrooms, trails, shelters, and some other things for Jesse Helms Park. Main library, the acoustical architectural panels over there. If you've driven by that library, you've seen how bad they are. We had to pull that off the project list last year because of budget issues. It's really got to get done this year, in my opinion. Cane Creek Park, we got a new camp store in this list. That camp store is 40 years old, woefully undersized, and located in the wrong place. We feel like it's important to take a look at that project. Patton Avenue Radio Shop renovation, I told you we're housed at a different location, a temporary location. We need to renovate that. We've got a renovation plan for Patton Avenue to relocate them to. The jail's got 3 commercial washers, 3 commercial dryers that need desperate replacement. We've got the large building envelope repairs on these 2 buildings, Government Center, Judicial Center, a pretty significant project, but if you remember a year and a half ago, I think, when we had all the flooding within the building, that's part of the what this project will help mitigate. Government Center, we also look to upgrade our building controls. This building actually has got pneumatic controls in it, which is kind of unheard of this day and age, and you can't find hardly anybody that can work on pneumatic controls. Moving on to critical infrastructure.
Real quickly, the washers and dryers at the jail are $50,000 a piece?
There's some associated, we're going to have to modify some fire doors to get things out and in. So we're, I don't know if they're 50,000, they're large. I mean, they're pretty big. They're significant. So it just not as just the equipment, but it's also some associated work with it. So CRI, we got Agriculture Center, adding generator infrastructure. That's in order to help us or add that building in our inventory of emergency facilities in case of emergencies. Government Center electrical infrastructure improvements here at this building. We've got major issues with the electrical system here in this building. There are a couple of UPS projects on here. One a general project, and one is a specific one out at the animal shelter. We've got a couple of generator replacements. One is public schools. That generator's, I think it's almost 40 years old. And then over at Judicial Center, that one we have some issues with. It's not that old, but we have some issues with that generator, and we need to get that generator replaced. Then we've got a couple of Liebert and split systems that support critical servers, one in Judicial, one in Government Center, $40,000, $90,000. Then the next section is our operating capital. I mentioned we try to keep that consistent level. If you look at, we've got 2 columns, fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22. The only change that we're requesting this year is in our operating capital facilities line from 400 to 550. If you take a look back at the list of allocations in that one summary page, you'll see that we're a little higher in operation capital this go around. So with that, I open up questions and any guidance that you may be able to provide.
Mr. Ray?
I need a 2-on-1.
Okay.
Chris, is that, excuse me, generator at the Ag Center, is that new?
That's a new generator. It doesn't have any generator. It doesn't have a generator right now.
Okay.
So it's a generator to basically.
Did it have, was it designed to have a generator?
No, was not.
How old is this facility?
Oh, that's 73, so that's
48 years.
45, 48 years old.
The UPS infrastructure upgrades and replacements in the county building, is that meant to address the problems we had with the power outage and the loss of the IP telephony?
It's some of it. It's a piece of it. So that's one system within that line that will get replaced and upgraded. But there are some other UPS systems throughout, the county that are part of that line too. But it will help address that. What really will help address that is the electrical infrastructure money or project.
Thank you.
On the generator, Chris, was the alarm notification changed from Public Works to here?
It was.
But I thought the generator was gonna be addressed immediately.
We're actually just put together or finished I'm going to say schematic design for dealing with that generator issue. So we're moving into that next phase.
Any other questions? Thank you, Chris.
Commissioner
Okay,
Ray,
thank you.
there were a number of components to that particular issue with the generator. One was the notification on the alarm piece, which was taken care of. Two was, how do we hook up a mobile or portable generator large enough to also help sustain this building if the power would go down? And that infrastructure for, I'll call it the pigtail and things, Chris, I believe that is in this budget. Is that correct?
Well, we allocated $140,000 to the electrical infrastructure last year. And so we've got, it was, I think, about $8,000 worth of design. So the remainder is what we've got on the books for
Right.
the rest of that work.
Right. But there is a plan they are working toward to ensure that if we were to have power outage in this building, that those issues would not repeat themselves that we had before.
Has the generator, the problem that caused it to go down last time, has that been corrected?
It has been corrected.
And is that generator adequate to run the building?
No.
It's adequate to run portions of the building, but not all the systems that we need it to run.
Is there a way to separate the power spine of this building to where?
That's part of the, I got to go back and look at the numbers, 1.2 maybe? 1.2 million is the electrical infrastructure project included in this year's request. We'll do that. It gets really complex when you start with an old building that met codes in 1972. When you start trying to separate, and you start even actually just touching the system, then there are new codes that require separation of critical emergency needs and then auxiliary needs. So if we wanted a power receptacle on the 8th floor that wasn't egress lighting or other things, then it's got to get separated. Right now they're all together, and it's pretty significant to start separating all those systems. So it just gets a little
Do you know
complex.
the KW or amp service that it takes to run this building?
It's 1,200.
1,200 amps?
Yeah.
So Commissioner Rape, if you think about time period, 1972, when this building was being designed, 73 when it was built, we didn't have computers. We didn't have a 911 system that operated 24/7, 365. There was very little in this building that required, other than emergency lighting, required a generator. So even though the generator that is currently located in the basement of this building was replaced several years ago, there was only so much size upgrade that could be done due to the space that was available to put a generator in, and then how it gets hooked up into the electrical system of this building. And you can imagine over all these years all of the different functions that have been added to that emergency power system. It's both the system and the generators is not adequate to meet what we have to operate with today.
It's just so hard to absorb this and not have questions.
Sure, I completely understand.
I'm going to talk briefly about two public safety capital needs for the county. The first is our communication network. Currently, Union County maintains 7 communication towers. We are currently in the process of adding 2 towers, one on Reed Dairy and one on Sims Road. These 2 additional towers are meant to address some coverage concerns we have down in the Waxhaw and Weddington area. There are some instances where police and fire will get inside a building and they're unable to connect because the signal is too low. All Union County public safety agencies use our communication network. So that's fire, EMS, all local law. The school systems have a 400 megahertz system on those towers, public health, emergency management. So there's a number of users that use these towers. Currently, these towers have what's called FDMA, Frequency Division Multiple Access capabilities. It is an old analog RF technology. It has worked very, very well. But what has happened is as time has gone on and more users have been added to this system, it is getting to the point where it is reaching capacity. You can only have so many users before you get to a point where you just don't have enough channels for all the radio traffic. The State Viper network in the UWASI, which is what we are part of in the Charlotte region, are moving to what's called TDMA, Time Division Multiple Access. It is a digital type of network. What it allows is to double the capacity. It will allow for twice the amount of traffic to go through the communication towers that we currently have. To upgrade to that system, there are 3 components. The MPLS, which is a series of routers at the actual tower sites to allow for that additional traffic. It would require replacing all the mobile and portable radios. Mobile radios are ones in vehicles, fire trucks and cars. Portable radios are the handhelds you see on firefighters and officers. It'll also require some hardware upgrades at the actual towers. Union County is responsible for the VFDs, Union County Sheriff's Office, Emergency Management, EMS, Public Health, Fire Marshal, Parks, Transportation, and Public Works. Those are all county responsibilities that use these towers. Yes, sir.
What was the name of the system where you're talking about going to?
It's called, it's the same system, it's a different type of communication on that network. It's called TDMA.
And so this is more towers than we have now?
It's not more towers, it's able to utilize the towers we have more efficiently, so you're able to get more traffic on those towers. Right now, we have 10 channels, so if we had 10 calls going on simultaneously right now, no one else would be able to use the radio network. By going to this TDMA standard, you're able to double that amount of traffic.
A few years ago, we talked about the Viper. That was brought up by someone at the Sheriff's Office. Is there any other systems that work with us that we currently have in place?
We are able to communicate with the Viper network with our current radio network. In order to continue doing that, the Viper network is going to the same TDMA standard. We will have to upgrade to that TDMA to be able to continue to communicate with the Viper network.
In your mobile and portable radios, a couple of years ago, it was a major issue to get to all 800 megahertz for volunteer fire and everything else. Will this replace all of those radios?
That number, we've already started replacing some of the radios to the new TDMA encryption, which is on the actual radio. That number is what it will take to replace the rest. All Union County public safety agencies are on the 800 megahertz system currently. Being that this is a new standard, they will require new radios to access that new system. So to answer your question, that number is what it would take to get every radio in the county that the county is responsible for to the TDMA standard.
So you're saying we have 5,800 megahertz now, and you need another 350, and that's what this facilitates, to the same frequency?
It's the same frequency, it's a different communication standard. So a lot of the radios we have right now, the Motorola 2500s, they're an end-of-life product. Motorola is no longer making them. They're no longer making replacement parts. We have a cache of those, so we have some replacement parts in case those radios go down. But Motorola is moving to this TDMA standard. So it's a new radio, and in order to access that new TDMA network, the radios themselves will need to be upgraded.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a note that Monroe Fire and all the local law enforcement agencies, we are not replacing those radios. Those agencies are responsible for replacing their own radios, but they are able to access our communication network. The next item is related to the fire departments. SCBA, self-contained breathing apparatus. There are two major manufacturers that departments in Union County use. It's MSA and Scott. It is best practice that when these packs need to be replaced, that they all be replaced at the same time. They have about a 15-year useful life. And the problem is if you start replacing them over multiple years, those companies can come out with different standards. And sometimes those standards are not backwards compatible with other devices. So again, it is best practice that when the SCBA's reach end of life, that they all be replaced in 1 year. Every seat on every truck should have an air pack, and this is important because smaller departments, Stack Road, Griffith Road, they may have 6 or 7 trucks, so they still have a fair amount of seats. But when you look at their total budget, it's a much smaller amount than a Wesley Chapel or a Waxhaw. So a complete replacement for a Stack Road or a Griffith Road would be significantly impactful on their tax rate in that district. So the goal in this year's budget is to try to come up with a sustaining model to where it doesn't impact districts on an annual basis. We're trying to come up with a way to level fund the replacement of these apparatus so it doesn't impact those individual tax rates annually. Yes, sir.
Before we do this, I would like to know that we have negotiated with both suppliers on these air packs and given, I guess you would say, every opportunity for our homegrown Scott systems. I know it's a bid process, but I know a few fire departments use MSA. But if we're standardizing everything, shouldn't we standardize everything?
Well, it gets into individual departments at that point. So there's a lot of departments that have an MSA standard and a lot that have a Scott standard. If you start replacing those packs with a different standard, there's other equipment that may have to be replaced as part of that transition.
But I thought you just said the best practice was to do it all at one time.
On the actual packs, yes. There are compressors, there are cascade systems on the truck that all work with that individual manufacturer. We can certainly communicate to the VFDs that we would like to try to unify use amongst air packs in the county, but ultimately it is what that fire department believes is the best method to provide fire service in that district.
So Commissioner Rape, what Patrick is alluding to is, for instance, if you have all MSA packs at one volunteer fire station and they are set to reach the end of their useful life next year, you replace all of them at that fire station at the same time. It's not, what we're not saying and not looking at is replacing all the air packs across the entire county with one version or the other. But, if you replace all the MSAs, for instance, at Mineral Springs, then Chief Gaddy only has to worry about, that model of MSA, in terms of replacement parts and repair, and they become most familiar with it. And then the other part is, you get out on the fire or in a situation where you have to swap parts out, you have to have the same model, on the same truck or in the same trucks in order to do all that. It becomes critical to life safety if they are not interchangeable and compatible. So that's what we're looking at. Some fire chiefs have preference for one vendor over another. You know, that's personal preference. I do know that we have good pricing with both of these vendors, but that doesn't mean we can't go back and negotiate or talk to these vendors on behalf of all of our volunteer fire departments and see if we can't do a little better.
I just want to give all the credit we can to homegrown Union County employees building these packs. And as I understand it, the majority of the fire departments do have Scott. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Well, it seems like to me if they was mutually assisting each other, it'd be nice to all have the same.
Well, I didn't say they were swapping equipment between each other, but out of the same department, off of different trucks.
Well, you know how literal I take things sometimes.
They definitely want the same equipment, the same model on all of the trucks in the same department.
Patrick, I know you can bring it to a good resolution and make us all happy.
Thank you, guys.
Patrick, over the last couple of years, we have bought a number of new packs.
We have, yes, sir.
And I don't disagree with the fact that if you got a lot of those packs have gone in to add to existing departments. If we have to replace those, one question is, do the packs come back to us? We bought them.
They don't right now. This could work similar to the radio program, where those are our radios that we purchase on behalf of the fire department, let them use it, and then when they're done, they return them to the county. That is not the way these air packs are handled right now, though.
Well, my point is, if you've got and I'll use Mineral Springs because the manager mentioned it. If Don, in the last 3 or 4 years, replaced half his packs, and you need to replace packs, my thought is, if we replace someone else's packs and they have good Scott packs that he's using, can we utilize these 15-year packs at other stations? I know it's not popular that I don't want used packs coming in. But
Right.
at $10,000 a pop, it's sufficient.
We can certainly have that conversation. Typically, they don't get rid of air packs if they still have useful life left in them. Once they get past that 15 years, they typically only use them as training packs, but we can certainly communicate that.
You see where I'm going?
I do,
Doug?
yes, sir.
Okay.
Any other
That's
questions?
all.
Thank you.
All right, you've heard a lot of needs, and actually, the questions we really appreciate, because that really is what we want, are the feedback and the questions that we know how to follow up on. So you will see a capital recommendation as part of the manager's recommended budget in a few weeks, and, I assure you, we will utilize, every possible solution, every tool in the toolbox to come up with a recommendation that is physically responsible and sustainable. Now you're going to hear from Jared White on more of the debt plan that I mentioned earlier. He's going to show you education and county debt together, and I think the way I described it earlier was just in a layered approach. If we simply issued debt over time, over the next 10 years, for all the projects that you've seen, what that would look like. And then we asked him to look at a sustainable funding model that would really be like a level, set of pennies that would go into debt and capital. A couple things that I just want to say before he starts going through his presentation, so that you have what I think is a good frame of reference. Currently, we have about $280 million in debt for education partners in the county, and we have about $80 million in debt for general county government. So you'll see that, we start at kind of a base of what debt we currently carry. And again, if you have questions for Jared, this is a good time to get those. We can always connect you afterwards. No action to take on this, and when he finishes, we'll ask you to take action on the one-time funding items that we have.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Thanks for having me. I think last time I was up here, we were talking water and sewer funding, so this is I sent it over in the wrong format, so I wanted to make sure it worked. But here's the outline of what we're going to discuss. And as Michelle mentioned, we were tasked with taking all of the projects from the education piece, from the county schools, community college, as well as the county projects, and try to figure out how much it's going to cost. How much are we going to pay each year, and then ultimately come up with a plan, whether that's an annual tax, which we'll go through on each one, or a flat rate tax. So it's a lot of information. There will be different charts and numbers. If anything doesn't make sense, I'd appreciate, interrupt me. We can talk about it. We can go back. But the more informative it is for you all, I think the better the discussion will be. So we will go through section 1. And before I do start, we have 5 sections here. We'll probably spend most of the time on the first 2. The remainder of it is going to be any questions you have on the credits the county's credit for general obligation bonds or limited obligation bonds. In terms of the rating agencies, we can talk about that, as well as what the rating agencies look at, and then end with some key ratios, peer comparisons of other AAA counties in North Carolina. So see how we stack up against some of the other AAA rated counties. So the first slide here is essentially a summary of what we heard in terms of dollar amounts. And so we've been proposed with the UCPS $757 million in projects. That's 21 different projects. SPCC, again, 21 different projects totaling $68.14 million. And then what Chris and Patrick have gone through, mostly Chris, would be the $252 million. I believe it's 34 different projects for that number. So total of 76 projects over a 8 to 10 year period. And ultimately how that breaks down into various bond issues, and then ultimately how much that's going to cost, or what that cost in terms of the tax allocation for the county, the millage rate. Anything in green we have dubbed as or designated as education, and then the red or maroon color would be the county projects. We've tried to keep that theme throughout so it'd be easier to see. So this is the model. This is essentially just a screenshot of the debt model that we've worked with Michelle and Beverly on. What we've done here is we've divided it up into 3 sections. The first 2 slides are focused only on the county's piece. They have the maroon there. They're in $252 million. We then moved to isolating just the education piece. And then the final model piece would be the combined. So this would be, what we're looking at here is the county projects, the 30, I think it was 34 projects, broken out for $252 million, and how much that would cost on an annual basis. And so what we did was looked at 3 different bond issues in 22, 24, and 2026, and how much that would cost. So what we're looking at here in what we dub as a heat map would be how much will the property tax be impacted by the annual debt service? How much do we need each year to pay for this debt? And so that would be in the red box, the dotted column there. And then the heat map ultimately shows how much of an increase is it to what we currently have on the books. So that same theme will flow through each of the models, each of the screenshot models that you have in your packets and on your screen. And ultimately you can see where the greatest impact is going to be. So I think the biggest point I want to show on this is out to the far right, we show a annual property surplus and deficit that remains at 0, ultimately because we are setting or proposing to set the tax rate and reset it each year. So it will be set at exactly what the debt service is needed to pay for that year. Therefore, there is no accrual of a property tax fund, which we'll see on the next slide. The second piece would be that it does go up and down. We start in the 2 cent range and we increase it all the way up to 6.5 pennies. Then that declines. So every year there would be a rate adjustment, whether that's an increase or a decrease, under this annual tax model. Any questions before I go on? I know that's a lot of information, but it is replicated 3 or 4 times throughout the
Outstanding
presentation.
county bonds is here at $88,739,000.
Yes, sir.
I mean, our geo debt's a lot higher than that right now. I'm sorry?
It's not for the educational debt, it's only on the county.
Okay, all right, that
Correct.
explains it.
Yep.
Are you going to be getting into how the county debt service numbers are arrived at? How you estimate those?
We did not put it in here, but what it is it's pretty plain vanilla for North Carolina. They're 20-year amortizations, and we, if I'm going off of memory, I think we did the 22 at a 4% interest rate, and then we escalated that up to a 5% interest rate. So very conservative, but we did stick with North Carolina makes you amortize over equal principal payments, so not level debt service, and maximum is 20 years.
Okay, so you said the interest rates you assumed were 4 to 5% on geo debt?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Where you could currently borrow today, let's say 2.5 to 3%.
Right.
Okay. All right, so then we flip to the same debt service. This is just the county, but here we bring in the idea of a flat tax. Instead of it going up and down every year, where it is boxed in red, we would set that at 4.79 pennies. What that would do is you would build up your property tax fund to have a surplus, and then over time start drawing down on it. A few benefits here is you pick one rate. Mathematically, you pick one rate and you set it for the life of the projects to pay back all of the debt. Another benefit would be that the tax would fall off earlier than the annual tax. So it would ultimately drop to 0 prior to the debt service being fully amortized. And it would also allow for additional projects down the road to come on board and absorb that gap.
That number, that 4.79, doesn't include school debt, right?
It does not. We're gonna flip to the school portion. The 4.79 overall is about 25%. So we're gonna work our way. I think the education piece is roughly 15 cents. The county side is roughly 5 cents. What we do here is we've put 2 red arrows on the right-hand column. That 4.79 is mathematically we solved to where the property tax fund never drops below 0. And then ultimately the 4.14, the last number there that we would propose as the tax rate or millage rate would be what would solve for 0 property tax fund for the remainder of the amortization for those bonds. Okay? So we have a few more slides. We can focus just on the education piece, or we can go right to the combined.
Why don't you give us the education piece?
Okay. All right, so the next one is, again, the annual tax. It is $825 million, and this is just isolating the education piece. Same setup. What we've carved out here would be 4 bond issues over that 8-year period. And ultimately, you would need to increase, you would need to have 20, I think the peak is in fiscal year 30 of 20.44 cents to cover that debt. If we flip over to the proposed flat tax, just on the education piece, instead of getting to that 20 cents number, we would set it at 15.36, and that would allow for a positive property tax fund, and you would not dip into any of the reserves with that number. Any questions on the isolated education piece?
Jared, if I'm not mistaken, that on the first number under that proposed is 11.63. That's the number that's currently funding education debt today in Union County. So just to call that out to the board's attention.
That is correct.
11.63 that you see in 2021, that is what it takes to fund education debt in Union County today. So the difference looks like that, what a difference between 15.36 and the 11.63.
That is correct, Mark. And I don't know, can you all see the cursor on your screens? So the 11.63 would be the 41.9 million here in fiscal year 21.
So that's roughly a 3.75 to 4 cent increase in tax, current tax. Same thing applicable on the Union County debt?
Yes,
Can you
sir.
go back to the Union County debt, please?
So this is the annual county debt, where we would maintain it for the first 3 years and then bring it on at an additional 1.52 cents in 24. That would build to 144, 426, and 402, and so on. Was that the question? Is that-
Yeah, I'm trying to look what the total increase would be. It's something over 5 cent
Yeah, so,
tax hike.
oh, on the combined?
Yes.
Yeah, so here's your combined numbers. So the first increase would be fiscal year 2024 for a combined 6 cents. And then again, the maximum increase on the annual adjustment would be in fiscal year 2030 at the 20.54 cents.
Jared, you have the level number?
So what we're looking at here is the combined education and county piece, the 825 million and the 252 million proposed for a flat tax of just over 20 cents, 20.15.
.5% tax increase. I mean, you look at the 20 and it looks like we're gonna raise taxes 20 cents. And that's not what you're saying. You're saying it'll be, because 1387 is what we're paying today, right?
That's correct.
So we're talking 6 to 6.5 cents
Right there in
to do both.
in the heat map, the shaded reds.
Yeah.
So it would be a 7.03 cent increase, maximizing at the end, which would, yeah, this is the flat tax. So if we looked here, it would be a maximum of a 20-cent raise on the annual.
So that 7.03 is over revenue neutral.
It would take that additional tax rate.
Sure.
Yes, it would take that additional tax rate to accommodate all of this debt. Now, I want to remind you that we're showing you numbers. We're not making a recommendation right now. We're not asking you to take any action. Jared is showing you what we asked him to prepare, and we're going to use this to come back with a recommendation, because we do think there's some validity around a flat rate, so we might give you some options. And so that's really, the feedback that we want. And then, as I said earlier about the education piece in particular, because it is a large number, is there will be some future decisions that this board's going to have to make about timing of bonds, sizing of bonds, what those look like. The thing that I would add also about a flat rate under, county-only education or county and education is you also, because you would build up some fund balance there, you would have the opportunity, if you look at projects, there's some on the education side and on the general county government that are smaller. They're not 80 million plus, they're 1.5 million, 2 million, 3 million, you would be able to use some pay-go opportunity so that you didn't have to issue debt over time if we had this type of, tool in our toolbox. So that's what we're going to look at when we come back with a recommendation. We also have 2/3 bond capacity that we could potentially have. So when I say, we're going to bring back to you a recommendation that uses everything that we think is available, these are going to be the tools that we look at. So that's what we're really looking for feedback on at this point. Not that I know what the numbers say. We're not saying we want to raise taxes by 20 cents or would make a recommendation for that. So I don't want anybody to leave here or watch this to think that that's what we're doing.
And then Commissioner Williams, to your question earlier on the 88 million, this shows it combined here.
Yeah, I get that now. In looking at the very first sheet here, I was just wondering where are all the other hundreds of millions of GO bonds, but I get it. Yeah.
Okay, all right, very good. One other point would be the county reval, and that has been factored in for 2021. No future refals have been assumed or factored into these numbers. So we've just gone with an assumed growth rate of the 4-year average, the prior 4-year average of 2017 to 20. So again, we think it's erring on the conservative side from a pro forma standpoint, and nothing here, from a financing interest rate or a growth rate perspective. We do feel comfortable with presenting these numbers.
So can you speak to how this gets adjusted year after year? I mean, clearly some of our, even the best assumptions aren't going to, hit the bullseye. So can you speak to kind of the process for how this gets adjusted over time in terms of the modeling?
Sure, yeah. So something along the lines of the flat tax can be analyzed every year. We can look at it and say, are we comfortable keeping it the same? Alluding to Michelle's points of if there is a little bit of a cushion, can we get another bond-funded project in there? If we want to adjust it back down, maybe based on interest rates or timing of projects, I think is going to be the key driver here. Absolutely, I think it's a tool that we want to offer to say, let's look at, rather than reanalyzing and revisiting it yearly, we have a flat rate tax model or tool that we can look at and maybe better project what this is going to cost over the long run. I have a few more slides. They're not debt related per se in terms of financing, but do we want to spend any more time on the numbers or the models or any other questions? Okay. So I know we've had a lot of conversations, maybe some individual conversations about the county's credit rating. And I'm sure everyone in this room and watching is well aware the county carries the highest bond ratings from Moody's, S&P, and Fitch of AAA. And so it's I would say it's a very rare occurrence. It should be one that everyone in this room is very proud of. So I think we've spent some time on this. General obligation bonds are the AAA by all three. If we do issue any limited obligation bonds or certificates of participation, those receive a 1-notch lower rating. And that is also part of the toolbox of issuing general obligation bonds versus what we call limited obligation bonds or installment purchase revenue bonds. So they're just different words for the same kind of credit. At the end of the day, they get paid through the general fund, but it just essentially is it tax-backed or is it annually appropriated with a real estate pledge? So. And then the next few slides are essentially Moody's. They have a scorecard rating system, so this is pretty deep into the weeds. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but this is what makes up a rating. And so they typically give, the economy and the tax base will carry 30% of the credit. The municipality's finances will be another 30%. Management, board policies is 20%, and then overall debt and pension liabilities are 20%. So when we stand up here and say, here's the amount of debt that we're going to bring on and how we're going to pay for it, that's 1/5 of the equation essentially. And so all of those other components, some that the individuals in this room have some control over and others that we don't. The economy and where you're located within the state and metropolitan areas are out of your control, but Union County is positioned very well on a number of these. And then this is just the details of each one of those. I think everyone has the information in their packets. I'm not going to, unless there are any questions, I'm not going to spend any time reviewing it. Okay. And the last piece I wanted to leave you with, again, a lot of numbers, and we're not going to go through them, but we have, I think it's 9. So it's Union County and 8 other counties out of 100 North Carolina counties that carry the AAA designation. So what we've gone through is we've carved out those counties and we've put them into essentially some statistics. So this would be a report card, and it's what Moody's looks at, it's what Fitch looks at, and it's what Standard & Poor's looks at to benchmark against your other peers. So we're not going to review any of the numbers. I did want you to have it in your packets to take home, and you can look at them. And my contact information's on the next page. Feel free to give me a call or email anytime. Happy to review it.
Any further questions?
That total full value, that's basically the maximum that we could potentially issue, right? 26 billion.
That's the value of the county.
Okay, that's the total value of the property tax base. Okay.
Correct.
And
that-
the total combined issuance for what we've seen here, both the county and the education piece, looks like it's not quite 1.1 billion.
And these are 2020 numbers as of June 30, 2020. How far down are you looking?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm actually going back a little
Oh,
bit. I
okay.
apologize. I was just trying to summarize. If we look at the county piece and the education piece, UCPS and SPCC, we're
Correct.
not quite 1.1 billion in issuance.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And just offer your full value, so, in 2020, we have it in the CAFR at 27 billion, and then with the reval, it's 36.14. So these are slightly lower. Definitely lower after the reval. Any other questions?
Don't believe, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
One of the things too, as Jared finishes, that we will start bringing to you as we're doing any debt issuance is really putting those measures in front of you more frequently, so that you know how we measure up to other AAA bond-rated organizations, because that is important. It saves us money. It's something that, Beverly and her folks are looking at, Jared's obviously looking at, but we want to put that, in front of you also, so that you know exactly when you're put in the position of making those decisions, how that might affect our bond rating as we move forward. So you'll see more of that in the future as well. Now we have the items that we want you to take action on. So we have 4 items. We put them on the action requested as A, B, C, and D. You can take them all as one item if you'd like. I'll leave that to the discretion of the board. But as you know, as we built out our budget for FY21, we were right at kind of the beginning of COVID. The first few months we weren't really sure what that looked like for us financially as an organization, so we took a very conservative approach, particularly to our sales tax numbers that we use to build the budget. And Blake provided a fairly in-depth presentation on that at your meeting last week. So what we're bringing to you are 4 items that would use that some of the additional sales tax that we expect to realize this year for one-time funding opportunities. And one of the things that I think you will all remember is that as we built our budget, there were a few things that we pointed out. One was that we were not able to fulfill the request that Union County Public Schools had made at the time, but if we did see increased revenues, we would come back, we would work with them and come back with a recommendation on using any one-time funds that might be available. We also took an OPEB holiday for our other post-employment benefits trust, and so that helped us meet our budget obligations. We also worked collaboratively with the sheriff's office to put off some items that he had asked for in his budget so that he stayed flat year over year from FY20 to FY21. So the items that we're asking for action on today and that we're recommending for approval are $2.5 million for a Union County Public Schools Board of Education request to provide one-time staff payments. And you have that information in your packet with the details, and Union County Public Schools representatives are here as well if you have any questions. We are also recommending $2.5 million for a contribution to the OPEB trust to reduce that unfunded liability that we have currently. And then for the sheriff's office, we're recommending 2 items. One is to approve $315,332 for one-time items for his office, and you have that list in your package as well. And then an additional $121,852 for ammunition purchase for the sheriff's office. And I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
I have one. The UCPS request, is this all staff? All employees? Okay. And as for your last item, that's only about 1,200 bullets.
It's not a lot, but we're giving them what they asked for. They want to get ahead of, some of you know how hard it is to get ammunition, so this will help them to get ahead currently. Commissioner Rushing, did you have a question?
Thank you. So these are things that would have been in last year's budget that we didn't approve or that were left out of last year's budget. And then we're going to approve them for just the extra money that we've got.
One-time fund, they have to be, they're one-time in nature, it's the only way we would use those funds. And some of them are definitely things that had been asked for, and in the sheriff's office in particular, there's some he would have had for last year. There's also some that he was anticipating as we're building out our budget, so we combined some of those to go ahead and use some of those one-time dollars at this time.
Some of the concerns I would have with this is, just like with the bonuses, we're going to be looking at people during this budget year in the budget that we do who've lost their small business, who've lost their restaurant, who've lost, employees, and then we're going to be talking about giving bonuses. And I know another one of our neighboring counties gave bonuses to their employees or gave an increase, and the employees came back and said, we want twice that. We're not satisfied with what you gave us. We want more. So right now, especially with the taxpayers and the concerns and the amount of budget money that you guys have shown us today, the needs that have come up for us today, I would rather see this as in part of the budget instead of trying to make a decision right now to spend this much money. The sheriff's office, if they're going to, like you said, 1,200 rounds of ammunition, do they have ammunition to make it through? Because it will get better. We usually go through these cycles every so often, and the ammunition right now is an all-time high, whereas in 6 months or so it could be more reasonably priced when the manufacturers get geared back up. So I'd hate to spend money on the high end. I'd hate to buy high and sell low. I'm going to buy low and sell high. So I'd hate to spend that much money on a little bit of ammunition that in 6 months or a year might be able to buy quite a bit. So what kind of shape are we in on ammunition at the sheriff's office? Are we depleted or what are we looking at?
I don't believe they're depleted, but I believe that they've made this request knowing that they want to have more capacity than they currently do. that they have an opportunity with the seller that is favorable to us, and they can get it timely, and that's why they're making that request at this time.
So these are 9mm rounds, and how much per round?
I am not sure, I don't know that I have that with me, I can get that for you.
I can tell you that the sheriff's office had to go trade ammunition.
It's a
for
combination.
9mm because they're so short. So there is a shortage.
Are these,
They were trading rifle ammunition with another state, really, to get 9mm so our deputies could stay current.
are these hollow points, full metal jackets?
You're asking things that are way out of my area.
Well, Commissioner or Chairman Helms, is it practice ammunition or carry?
The particular time they were looking at, they were trying to get practice ammunition. They didn't have it for the deputies to stay current. So,
Nobody from the sheriff's department's here that could answer that, are they?
No, I don't think so.
I do.
It is 9mm rounds, gold dot G2 ammo, 1,000 rounds per case, 20 cases. Full metal jacket, American Eagle, 1,000 rounds per case, that's 9mm, 250 cases. Spear, 223, 50 cases, 500 rounds per case, 223. Boat Tail American Eagle, 500 rounds per case, 200 cases. Again, my perspective is that, I trust the sheriff and his staff to give me the requests that they believe are appropriate for what they're doing, and that's what they've provided to us.
And they believe they're getting a good deal.
Yes, sir.
my understanding is that, one, we've made commitments for the 2.5 million for bonuses in the past. Our OPED, we delayed. The sheriff definitely has needs, so I'd make a motion we approve all four. Any further discussion?
I support all four funding items. I think that absent an actual raise for school employees, particularly teachers, I think this is the next best thing. As we head into the summer, we need to think about competition from other school districts in terms of taking away some of our better teachers. And I think doing something like this now sends a pretty good message to our current base of current base of teachers. And I strongly support the 2.5 million for school employees. In terms of ammunition, I mean, I defer to my good friend and Commissioner Stoney Rushing in terms of understanding, the needs there. All I can say there is basic materials prices keep going up. I mean, we've all noticed the inflation. I don't have a crystal ball that works any better than anybody else's, but I'm prepared to support all four funding items.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I would recommend that you take these separately. You certainly can do it as one, but I would recommend that you break it down into 4 separate functions.
All right, I'll make a motion that we adopt BA number 49 to approve the Union County Public Schools BOE request for $2.5 million for one-time staff bonuses. I have no conflict of interest, but I have many of friends that are in the school system, and I know they deserve this.
I'd like to adhere to your recommendations, therefore I remove my motion. And we have a motion for Mr. Raitt. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Next, a motion to adopt BA number 50 to approve $2.5 million for a contribution to OPED Trust to reduce the unfunded liability of the county's OPED obligation. I'll make a motion. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Next, I'll make a motion to adopt BA 51 to approve $315,332 for one-time items for Union County Sheriff's Office. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Next, I'll make a motion to adopt to approve $121,852 for ammunition for the Union County Sheriff's Office. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's all we have?
That's it.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Manager?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just one brief point of information for the board this afternoon. Later this week, I'll be sending out a communication to our employees regarding health insurance premiums for their health insurance plan. Over the past 20 years of operating this and providing this health insurance plan for employees, the county has only increased the employee contribution share one time. And the proposed budget does or will include a recommendation for funding, additional funding from employees related to their health insurance premiums. These are very nominal increases to premiums. In fact, I was just doing the math a minute ago, and if you stretch both the increase we had, I believe, in 2010, and you take this increase this year, it would amount to a $1.50 a year increase, each year over the last 20 years. So I wanted the board to be aware that communication would be coming out from me later this week. I'll be glad to answer any questions that the board may have relative to that, and certainly would be glad to answer any questions that the employees have related to that. But it's a nominal amount. This is not an arbitrary increase. We have reviewed the current reserves of our health insurance program and the current reserve policy of our health insurance program. This is in an effort to strengthen the financial position of this benefit. We want to continue to provide a benefit, a health insurance benefit that is sustainable and continues to be offered. And we want to continue to offer a benefit that is affordable, both to the employer and to the employee and their families. And these very nominal increase this year, we believe, meets both of those goals, keeps us financially sound into the future. But I wanted you to be aware that I will be sending that out later this week. So with that, thank you very much.
Any further discussion? If not, I'll make a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Dennis, you don't want to adjourn?